Good morning and welcome back to our studies in Gospel according to Mark chapter 8 and 9. Some of you have responded and some of you have asked question in WhatsApp group. I recommend that you ask on the Facebook so that many others can benefit from your questions. One of you have asked the question from Mark's Gospel chapter 8 verse 23. When Jesus healed the blind man, in verse 23 he says,
Subscribe our channel and hit the bell icon so you will receive more notification.
It is written here, he took the blind man by the hand and laid him outside the village. Very good question that you have asked. Why did Jesus lead him outside the village? And this is not the only one incident. We see also in chapter 7, verse 33, when he was healing a deaf and a mute man, he took him aside away from the crowd. We read in chapter 7, verse 33, after he took him aside away from the crowd. We see very clearly in the text, there are more than one reference here, that Jesus was trying to avoid the crowd. He was not primarily interested in becoming popular, because his primary purpose was not to perform miracles and signs and attract people to himself and become popular. In fact, you will see there are many instances where he particularly instructs them not to tell. You read in chapter 8 verse 26, Jesus sent him home saying, "Don't go into the village." Then also in verse 30, Jesus warned them not to tell anyone about him. Then in chapter 9, we see in verse 9, as they were coming down the mountain, Jesus gave them orders not to tell anyone. He was not interested in becoming a sensational news. Remember that his primary purpose was different, not performing miracles. He performed miracles because in his divinity he was capable, but also he was compassionate, and in his compassion he used his ability to do miracles. But as you read in Gospel according to Mark chapter 8 verse 31 onwards, two things become very clear, that his primary purpose was to bring redemption to sinful mankind. He must die on the cross. The cross was his objective. He must pay the penalty of sin for all of us so that we may have redemption. We read in chapter 8 verse 31. He then began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, chief priests, and teachers of the law, and he must be killed, and after 3 days rise again. The second purpose of his coming was that if anyone would like to follow Jesus Christ, they must follow his life example. In verse 34 in chapter 8 he says, "Then he called the crowd to him along with his disciples and said, 'If anyone would come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save his life will lose it. But whoever loses his life for me and for the gospel will save it.'" Yes, indeed, he came to heal, but he came to heal us from the slavery of sin. He came to redeem us. He also came to heal us from the slavery of selfishness. He wanted us to live a life for God and selfless life. Whoever loses it will gain it. So he was not primarily, here to perform miracles and heal everybody. The true healing that we need is healing from the slavery of sin. Because sin is the one, our greatest obstacle, and also our greatest enemy is the death, because wages of sin is death. So he came to give us the victory over death. It's interesting that he talked about victory over death, but the disciples were not so much interested to know. They were having different interest. We read in chapter 9, verse 10. They kept the matter to themselves, discussing what rising from the dead meant. They did not ask Jesus. In fact, there are other instances where we see they were not even asking, they were afraid. Verse 32 in chapter 9, verse 32. But they did not understand what he meant and were afraid to ask him about it. Jesus was telling them about a victory over death. Rather, they were only interested in who will become the greatest. We read in verse 33, 34. They came to Capernaum. When he was in the house, he asked them, "What were you arguing about on the road?" Verse 34, chapter 9, verse 34. But they kept quiet because on the way they had argued about who was the greatest. They were not so much excited to know how they can overcome death, have a victory over death, and have resurrection. But they were more thinking about this world rather than the world beyond. May God help us to understand the mystery of why Jesus came and what is our actual need. Probably then we will have the right question to Jesus. I want to ask you the question, why people are not so much interested to ask this question about the victory over death. Why they are not so much asking this question about their struggle with sin. How to get over, how to overcome the slavery of sin, how to overcome the problem of selfishness, and all that human beings are suffering because of sin. Why they are not asking this question, but why they are looking for a temporary healing. You see so much of people coming for immediate response, something instant answer. But probably many of them are not concerned about long-term solution of the problems of humankind. Why do you think so? Look forward to hear from you. Have a wonderful day. Blessing. Bye-bye.
Subscribe our channel and hit the bell icon so you will receive more notification.